I don't know. I mean, I sort of didn't really know what the hell I was doing at one level. I'd not been brought up or enculturated into that whole world of divination as part of a way of life. It was like totally alien to me. I was just literally turned up, had some cards, and I realized that when I shuffled them and laid them out, voices spoke to me and I saw images. Like it was sort of almost, it didn't feel like this was some special gift. It just felt like this is just what I did.
Welcome to Her Drive Podcast, a female-focused interview series with women of the world discussing their road trips to success. I'm your host, Cindy Kremblatt, a travel expert, business owner, and curious spirit with a knack for meeting fascinating women. Please join me as I hop in the passenger seat and chat with these ambitious women about what drives them, twists and turns, and those pedal to the metal moments. Let's drive. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Her Drive Podcast. This is Cynthia Kremblatt, your host, and I'm excited for today's guest. Her name is Kate Tomas, and she's a highly trained psychic and professional witch. And I'm very excited to share her story. I was just in the UK. We were unable to connect in person, but thought we'd give it a go and just do an audio interview. So, hey Kate, how are you doing?
I'm so excited to be here. I'm so thrilled that we could do this. And I can't wait.
All right. Well, as far as what you do, I'm sure when people find out what you do, they're always like have a million questions like I'm going to ask you. So if there was going to be like a roadside billboard to describe you and your work, what would it look like and say?
Wow, that's a good question. I suppose the first answer would probably be covered in gold, because everything that I touch and have anything to do with, I like to be like blinged out. So,
love that.
Yeah, bright colors and a lot of gold. But I suppose what it would say is that I work as a professional psychic and witch, which a lot of people, as you say, are like fascinated by, because they kind of think they know what it means, but aren't certain. And so on a practical level, what that means is that I make my living by doing divinations for people. So I read tarot cards and describe to them everything that I'm seeing and hearing. And then also I do spells to cause material change in people's reality.
Wow. Okay. Well, after this interview, I'm going to have so much work for you. Okay. Well, for some folks, I'm sure it's like, okay, this is like hocus pocus. This is nonsense. Like this cannot possibly be real. I'm someone who believes in this work that you're doing. So, can you kind of like dive into, I guess there's not really science that proves any of, maybe there's science that proves it.
That's the fascinating thing. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to say is I was brought up in a very scientific background. So my parents are both scientists. Anything religious or spiritual or anything that wasn't very rational and logical was dismissed as nonsense. So I actually grew up believing that all psychic phenomena, magic, any stuff like that was actually just rubbish and people deluding themselves. And it wasn't really until I was about 16 or 17 that I started to actively have that belief challenged by my own experience. So I have a lot of respect and understanding for people that initially just would assume that, what the work that I do has no rational foundation to it. But what's really fascinating is the more that you research what's actually going on in magical processes or psychic phenomena, what one realizes is that it's actually very rational. It's very natural, I suppose. I would use that word cautiously, but it's not something that is supernatural or outside of external to the normal everyday world we live in. Almost the opposite. It's about harnessing very natural energies and the energy of the universe, if you like, understanding it and refocusing it in a particular direction.
Ooh, fascinating. Okay, so you had mentioned that you first started to have some type of experiences when you were a teenager. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of walk me through what started to happen?
Yeah. So I actually, looking back, could see once I was 16, 17, and realized that the sort of way that I had experienced the world was not normal, I was able to look back and realize that the experiences I were having, I could remember from as early as at the age of 4 or 5 years old. So I'd always, I suppose, experienced the world in a slightly or very unusual way. I would just know information about things that I shouldn't rationally know about. I would see particular beings, I guess that's the best way of putting them. They, for me, were just like friends, but they weren't imaginary friends. They were, real people, but not real people that other people could see. And that these people would have conversations with me. They would talk to me and tell me things. And later on, now I have a sort of understanding or a framework that at least allows me to understand that those were probably my spirit guides. And so, yes, from very early on, from being a child, I would just I had access, I suppose. I had access to extra information about things. And often this would get me into a lot of trouble. But it also protected me an awful lot from a lot of trauma and a lot of difficult situations that without these sort of relationships with my guides or this extra bit of information that I had access to, probably I might not have survived as well. So for me, I think my intuition or my psychic abilities are sort of very connected and tied to my traumatic childhood. I think that they sort of developed.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, I'm glad it's you, not me. Developed as a sort of coping mechanism and survival mechanism, really, for me. And then as I grew older and was able to start, exploring the world outside of that which my family had, taught me or given me access to, I started to learn that there were other people that had experiences similar to mine, and that these people were called clairsentience or clairvoyance. And I just started to learn, I suppose, at the age of 16, 17, about different ways in which the world and the universe can be experienced. And so, that's kind of what happened.
So at that age, when you started to have these experiences, did you share anything with your parents about what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, as a child, I would share everything. Children do, right? They just sort of innocently kind of explain what's going on for them, and it's all very normal. And I think the thing that has been most interesting to recognize for me growing up as an adult and going through 20 years of therapy, as most adults kind of that have the funds to be able to do so ought to do, is realize just how much my parents' response to my sharing my experience of the world negatively impacted me. So when I did tell my parents about what I was seeing, or the voices I was hearing, or the information that I had access to, they would I think my parents were scared, honestly, but their response was to ridicule it and dismiss it at a very in a very extreme way, and the most effective way to dismiss anything is to ridicule it, actually. So yeah, they would just laugh at me, to the point where I would sort of quickly learn not to share anything. I'd be very, very cautious about telling them anything that I experienced or that happened to me, whether that was what happened to me at school, like any normal child, or a weird experience. I wouldn't be able to tell the difference as to what was acceptable and what wasn't. So I just stopped sharing, really.
And has your since then, I would imagine that would cause quite a rift in the family. Have you found a way to work through that relationship with your parents and still continue down this journey that you're on?
I mean, I tried for. So the short answer is absolutely not. So I tried for, I think, about 32 years. I was really trying very hard, as I think most people do, even if they have, problematic or even abusive parents. We sort of really value and want our parents in our lives. And I certainly tried for about 32 years to maintain a relationship with my parents, despite their, quite aggressive dismissal of who I was. I realized it's not just so much the work I was doing, because I haven't always done this this work, although it has always been who I am. But then after, I think I got to the age of 32, and I just thought, God, this is exhausting, and also, totally at odds with my health, my mental health, and I just don't need the validation of these people that don't care enough about me to sort of accept me as I am. Yes, that's almost 7 years ago now. I think I have no contact with either parent, and actually, it's really significantly improved my life, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Sort of almost immediately, things got better for me without. It's always so difficult to. I think if one tries to chase approval from anyone, you're sort of fighting a totally losing battle, and particularly I think with parents and parental approval, it's almost never given anyway. But certainly if you're in any way unusual or weird, as I clearly am, it's almost inevitably never going to happen anyway. So you might as well just give up early. I wish I'd have given up, 20 years earlier than I did, but it was the age of 32.
Okay. Well, I think that's very difficult. I have a lack thereof relationship with my father, and it actually took. I'm 29. I feel like there's many years where we didn't speak.
Right.
And just this past summer, fall, I read a book called "Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents," and that book helped me to at least look at those personality traits and damages within my father, and help remove kind of the fantasy that eventually he's going to change or accept me or be different. Obviously, our stories are completely different, but it helped me realize, you know what? You don't have to have a relationship with him. You can you choose all of your other relationships. You can choose to not have one with him. So, and kind of the same as you said, like once I accepted that, I'm like, okay, I feel relatively like whole and healed. So
I think that's really healthy. And I also think that, culturally we're so, we're socialized and we're taught that family is the most important thing. And really, when we start to unpack what that actually means, what most people mean when they're saying family is, sort of 2.4 children, 2 parents, 1 male, 1 female, a couple of kids. And actually we have to start asking, I think, who is saying that family is so important, and particularly what family means. And there's always an agenda, and the agenda is most of the time to sort of prevent people to keep people in line in some way, culturally and socially. And I just think, the most problematic and damaging relationships with most people's lives are from their parents or family members. So it seems sort of, once one has actually done the therapeutic work, as you've just described, in like examining the relationship for what it is, despite what we're told that we must have parental relationships, then you start to realize, gosh, this is actually really toxic for me, and it's creating cycles of abuse in my life. And one has to sort of, I think, recognize that you have an ability to take responsibility to stop engaging in certain behaviors. And so I think it's really a real courageous act to actually just sort of walk away from a parental relationship. So yes, I think it sounds like you did a very good thing, really.
Thank you. Time will tell. Well, so getting back to your journey, so we talked about kind of what was going on as a teenager. You went on to university. Can you kind of like walk me through your early adult life up until, where you are now? Like, what did you study? What work did you do? And how did you get to where you are now?
Okay, so I left home as soon as I could. So I left home at 15 and moved in with my boyfriend at the time. That was not a great relationship, like sort of pretty textbook classic abusive relationship, actually, but it was sort of better than the family life that I had at home. So it was still kind of a good move in that regard. It was an improvement. And so I finished school a year early. I did my exams a year early just so that I could leave the town that I was living in. And then I carried on in education, went to university. I was very aware that I had this collection unique abilities, let's say. I'm very hesitant to call them gifts, but by this point I was reading cards for friends. I just sort of encountered the tarot when I was 17, and was sort of reading for friends and friends of friends, not charging any money, just because I was really fascinated by everything that I could see. It was such an exciting thing to be able to do for someone. But I carried on. I went to university, decided that I wanted to study classics. So I did a degree in ancient Greek literature, and all was sort of well on the surface. Although I think, like most 17 or 18-year-olds, if one's in a relationship, it's not often very healthy or good. But I think I had plans at that point to continue on, and eventually my plan was to train as a barrister. I don't know if you have barristers in this, like an attorney,
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And I got through my degree, finished the first degree, and at the same time as finishing that first degree, I had made a trip to Glastonbury, which is a town in the southwest of England, which is often considered or broadly considered the center of the New Age in England. So it's really a town that's kind of filled. Every other shop is a crystal shop. There's every form of New Age healing and whatever else is available there. And I encountered Glastonbury, visited for the first time, and just fallen in love with this place. Although I sort of also hated it because I was still fighting against this sort of rationalist, materialist worldview that I still had had adopted. But yes, at the end of the degree, I had become fully invested and involved in the study of Western esoteric traditions, which is to say, like, studies of magic and ancient magical traditions in the Western part of the world. And so when it came to finishing my degree and deciding what I was going to do next, I had a choice, really. It was either continue my education as I had planned and do a conversion course, which would have qualified me to eventually be a solicitor, or I thought, well, maybe I could survive making a living reading tarot cards in Glastonbury. And so I just thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. And so I moved to Glastonbury.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at this and I'm like, okay, you are kind of on this normal Western society highway to what everybody says this is what you should have, this is what you should want. And then you're like, you know what? Forget that. I'm going to go almost like off-roading in a way. Was it a really bumpy journey at first?
Yeah. I mean, I think by that point I had given up hope of, well, I mean, maybe that's not true. I was going to say I'd given up hope of approval from my parents. I think I'd realized that I was never really going to get the approval that I sought. And half of, if not more than half of the reason I was training to be a lawyer was because that's what my parents wanted me to do. And I just was so happy when I was in Glastonbury, and I couldn't really deny that. I was really, really very calm and sort of joyful, which was rare for me because I grew up with terrible depression and anxiety. And so when it came to making a decision about, do I carry on with academia, which I had always been very able at, like academia was not something that I struggled with particularly, although I had, a collection of, how would I say it? Like I'm very dyslexic. So I had like practical issues with the comprehension. I still was able to communicate, my thought adequately and have original thoughts. So I never struggled with academia, but it just didn't excite me at all. So it was a bit scary, I suppose, to make that decision. But then also in another way, it was like the path kind of fell in front of me. It's such a cliche, but it really did feel like that. Like, I immediately got a job in a shop, and, within a couple of weeks I was reading tarot cards. The job that I got was just working as a sales assistant, but I started reading tarot cards for friends of friends, and then started charging £10 for a reading, which seemed like a huge amount of money to me at the time. And the pressure of charging people money to sort of do this thing, which I didn't even know, no one had trained me how to do. I had taught myself, felt immense. But then it just immediately took off. I think it wasn't that bumpy because I was very fortunate, and as soon as I started work, the work increased through word of mouth. It was just spread like wildfire, and then suddenly I was busier doing readings than I was working hours in the shop, and it was much more profitable for me to be doing readings than working in the shop. So yeah, I mean, I can't honestly say. I mean, the bumpiness was the active choice to walk away from, or what felt like turning my back on, a sort of conventional life of success and financial stability, to be literally like living like a gypsy in Glastonbury, reading tarot cards, not knowing if I'd earn £10 that day or nothing. But I've never really worried very much about that. I've been extremely, extremely poor and not been able to eat because I've not had food, but it's never really made me existentially anxious, if you see what I mean. It's, practically it's been difficult, but yeah, I sort of always ended up knowing that it would work out, and it did.
Clearly, wow. There's like just so many things that I want to ask as far as following up from that journey. When you first started to do the readings and people were coming to you, was there ever like a bit of an ego that came into play? And like, how, I would imagine there would be, but maybe not.
I mean, I was 19, 20, I think I was 20 at this point. So I was so young, and in a way, I was very fortunate in that my ego was just absolutely not allowed to develop, despite how successful I was, because there were much older tarot readers in Glastonbury all around me, constantly battering me down. But, in a kind of hilarious way, I don't know. I mean, I sort of didn't really know what the hell I was doing at one level. I'd not been brought up or enculturated into that whole world of divination as part of a way of life. It was like totally alien to me. I was just literally turned up, had some cards, and I realized that when I shuffled them and laid them out, voices spoke to me and I saw images. Like, it was sort of almost, it didn't feel like this was some special gift. It just felt like this is just what I did. And I think that, there was a lot, the difficulty of Glastonbury and my years in Glastonbury was that I think I put a lot of people's noses out of joint because I wasn't anything like the other readers in many different ways. But, I was just like a 21-year-old kid who, didn't really have anything to do with the spiritual side of things, didn't have a religious tradition, and yet was busier than anyone else. And I think, I pissed people off, frankly. And so my ego was not allowed really to develop. I just kind of, it felt very much like survival. I was just going to work like I would have, like exactly as I would have gone to work working in the shop, as I had, I worked in supermarkets and shops and all of that. And it was just the same, honestly. So I never really associated the visions that I had, or the things that I could see, or the information that I had access to with me. It really never felt like it was me. So not really. I mean, the ego developed later when I had to defend myself against, people later on. I suppose one has to, especially as a woman, like, one has to build up a sense of self and self-esteem and ego. And I think ego is super important, just as long as it's kept in balance, but then it was the opposite. I had very low self-esteem, like extremely low self-esteem. I was in a relationship that I shouldn't have been in for 9 years. So that kept me down as well. You can always trust an abusive man to keep you down.
Oh my God, this is like the theme of the day. Oh my. Yeah, this is like something I've been thinking a lot about over the last since I woke this morning, about abusive people, but specifically abusive men. So you're doing these readings for people, and you're hearing and seeing these visions and these voices. And how were you? I mean, were you seeing like your spirit guides? Were they talking to you about what was happening in your own life as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know is the answer, because even now looking back, I could say, well, they were trying to get me out of that situation in so many different ways, but I just was not able to see or hear. It's incredible how stubborn we can be. And I'm one of the most stubborn people I know. So I'm never surprised when I see clients and their guides have really specific, direct information for them. You know, they're like told this is what you need to do, and they still resist it. I'm not surprised by that because I did it myself. So yeah. I think yes, they were. I've always felt very, very pushed by my guides. I don't think guided is really the right word. Like I felt like deep antagonism towards them myself. I'm like, fuck off, I don't want you to be here, I don't want to do this job, I don't want to, you know, like that's the other thing to mention is this was not something that I ever really wanted. It just was the quickest and most effective way for me to be making money, honestly, because I was good at it and I was concerned with paying my rent. And then I enjoyed the satisfaction and the sense of like being able to help someone, which sounds as cheesy as it gets, but like it's truly the only purpose I think that it has any meaning in the world is doing something that has positive impact on another. But other than, you know, that was a side effect, I suppose, of the work rather than the reason I was doing it. I was doing it to pay my rent, you know.
Wow.
so yeah.
And have you grown to love and embrace what you're doing?
Yes, I think very, very honestly, within the last 5 years, there's been a huge shift, and the biggest change I think for me was it's really, I think probably this is the same for everybody. It becomes one gets to a certain point in life where you have to just accept who you are and really, you know, pay attention to who that is and respect it, and then start making space for her in the world. And I think that, again, you know, for people that are not men and for women in particular, you know, it's actually often very, very difficult for us to make space for who we are in the world because we've been constantly taught not to do that. You know, like there is just no encouragement for us to even ask, who are we? What do I want? Like, you know, these questions are not questions that we're encouraged to ask. And so for me, I think it took a really long time to take seriously the answers to those questions and also accept a little bit, like, you know, there's not very much I can do about the fact that there's lots of things in my life I have very little control or no control over. And one of them is I have this ability to hear spirit guides and I have this ability to know things. And so there's a collection of things I can do with that. And the best possible way that I can use that fact is to help people that I want to help, and create a good life for myself as a side effect of that help. But, you know, I think it's really just about acceptance. And so now, yeah, because I've managed to carve out a life for myself where I work, you know, 3 days a week, I'm pretty chill about it, you know. But it really did take, you know, I'm 38, I think now. It took a very long time to accept that this was, you know, who I was. I didn't want it to be. I still had ambitions of being a barrister and a lawyer up until, you know, 5 years ago even. So yeah, but now I'm very kind of accepting of it and have decided to just make the best. I think that's the thing. You need to accept who you are and make the best of it, whatever that is.
Right. Well, one of the things that I hear people say who are more so like skeptics, they say, well, if you're psychic, you should be able to tell me like the lottery, or you should be able to make yourself really rich, or, you know, what do you say to people who think that way?
Well, I'm not doing too bad on the second. The first,
Good for you.
Thanks. I think the first is a fundamental misunderstanding of what psychic work is. You know, it's not that, I mean, people winning the lottery is just, it's so funny because you're right. That is always where, particularly not very smart people go when they're going to question the validity of my work, which thankfully at this stage, I'm like, I don't have to deal with people like this very, like, if ever. It's kind of entertaining if you encounter them. But now what I would say is, you know, the lottery is just, winning the lottery is kind of like so fundamentally unimportant, like, you know, like it's and that's not to say that poverty is not important and real lack of money is not a real thing. Like, my God, that's real and that's a real problem. But winning the lottery is not, you know, really going to solve very much other than an immediate material need. And in terms of the nature of psychic work, it's actually so much more about understanding. So like getting figures and numbers for a lottery, it's just like it's just the wrong question. It's just fundamentally the wrong question. Having said that, I do some of the work. One of the forms of work that I utilize my skills to do is I have someone that I invest, who's a stock market investor, and I work with him, and we sit down and I plot the charts, the locations of where I think certain charts are going to go. So it's very, very possible to have like very material evidential, effects, if you like, of this work. You just need to know where to look and how to use the skills. But winning the lottery is just like, I mean, it's just so insanely, like what's the word? Like the chances of getting that right are so crazily, madly improbable that it would just be a total waste of time. However, it is absolutely possible to really quite accurately predict the direction of the gold chart, for example. And so as soon as you realize that that's possible and you start paying attention to that, then you make money. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Magical. Okay, so I'm coming to. I hear about you, your work, and I'm someone who's curious of hiring you and as someone who can help me dive deeper into kind of like hidden messaging and improve either my business or myself or both. Like, what is that experience like?
So I offer a collection of readings, but they basically fall into two categories. So personal reading, so working with people one-to-one to deal with personal matters, and then I work with businesses. And in fact, my favorite clients, if I could, wave a magic wand and say 90% of my clients would be entrepreneurial women, really. So women that have their own business and are wanting to expand that and be more successful, both commercially, materially, as well as just work-life balance. So those are actually the majority of my clients. I've got to say, I'm fortunate in that most of the clients that I work for have their own business. And so what I offer are business readings. So these are basically divination, so tarot card readings, but the cards are sort of used as a way of structuring and organizing the information that I get from my spirit guides. So with anything, it's possible to pay attention to it and get extra information. And when one's working with spirit guides, it's even possible to get like very detailed, specific information. So if you were coming to me and you had a business, either a well-established business or something, just a business idea, the process is the same. So I would connect up with my guides. I would be asking them to show us everything that you need to know in order to make decisions and choices that will lead you to success and happiness, whatever that means for you. Because, one person's success may well involve them quitting their business and going to work in a supermarket. Like that could be success by all means. And another person's could be the opposite, that, they should take their business idea and leave their job in the supermarket and start their business. So I never know what's going to come up. But generally what happens is I get very specific, clear information about the business and where energy should be focused, like what actions need to be taken, what particular and specific steps there are between where they are to get to where they want to get to. I mean, whole business plans are often presented. It's really quite amazing to me. Wow. What comes up. Yeah. And I work with businesses, as I say, from people that just have a vague idea of what they maybe might want to do at some point, all the way up to multinational corporations hire me for the same. I just charge them very much different amounts of money. Yeah.
Well, that I've never heard of someone doing your type of work for businesses. And I'm glad that you're focusing on, I don't know if you're focusing on that intentionally, but females in business, because I feel like this is a conversation that's, global, but about more so the suppression of women and forever, basically.
No, absolutely. I mean, like I say on all of my literature and my website that my aim is to sort of give access to information that's hidden from women and non-binary people. So basically everyone that's not a man. Now, that's not to say that I won't read for men. A lot of my clients are men, and some of my sort of sounds so funny. I'm like, some of my favorite people are men. Actually, that's not really true, but like some of my favorite clients happen to be men, and they've been coming to me for years, and I will not, it's not that I won't work for men, but I intentionally and actively prioritize work with women and people that are non-binary, so neither men nor women. And that's for a really important reason. As far as I'm concerned, men are under, we all live under patriarchy, unfortunately, and men are so significantly benefited by that. They have so much advantage in the world that it would seem totally shitty, really, of me to be contributing this incredible gift and ability, let's say we call it a gift, ability that I have to just add to that advantage that they have, when women and people that are not men are so actively oppressed in the culture that we have. So, I will work for men, but it's kind of like, I think of it like Robin Hood. For a start, I charge them more money, and I will only read for a certain amount per month. That's my kind of men max. And then the rest of my time and my effort and energy is focused on the bettering of women, because that's it's what's right. And also, I feel very passionately that we need to sort of band together. That's the only way that oppression ends, is ultimately through revolution. And I think really, as women, any of us that have any abilities whatsoever to improve the lives of others, we should start with our own. So that's why.
Magical in all forms. Well, as far as like your own like personal development and self-care, do you have like rituals that you do daily, weekly, monthly to, just be in your best head, spirit,
Absolutely.
physical space?
Yeah, I have. Gosh, I mean, to keep me going is like a team effort. Like, I think because the nature of my work, as you mentioned, is so, it's so intense, and it's very, it's I don't know. I go very deep very quickly with every client that I work for. And so it's really important for me to be able to maintain physical health and, energetic health. Boundaries are the sort of number one thing I need to sort of maintain. And one can only maintain one's boundaries if one is, has a good amount of energy. It requires energy to maintain boundaries. So yes, every morning I have routines for everything and rituals for everything. I mean, that's part of magical work is ritual, because ritual is simply a repetitive action that focuses intention on a particular thing. So I have morning rituals, which involve me meditating every morning. I sage my workspace. I make coffee for my partner. We have breakfast together. We sort of play with the animals. We have 3 animals in a 1-bedroom Brooklyn apartment. It's quite an intense experience. And then I start work. And then in the evening, it's the sort of opposite of that. So I also sage the area that I've been working in, and then make myself, it sounds so basic, but like pour myself a glass of seltzer water over some ice and a little slice of lemon. And that's like my sign that my day is done. And then I, watch crappy TV after cooking a nice meal. But I also have a collection of, I guess I'm always cautious about calling them degenerative diseases, because I feel like words have so much power, and I don't really want to believe that things are actually going to degenerate. But I have chronic illnesses and a couple of autoimmune diseases, which means that I have to be really on it with my physical health and my diet particularly. So that's my main area of self-care, is actually to do with my physical energy. And then from having good physical energy, I can maintain my energetic boundaries, which comes through visualizations and meditations mainly. But having said all of that, I also take antidepressants every day, which I would not be able to survive without antidepressants. I have depression and anxiety, and then a whole collection of herbal supplements and like tinctures, teas, everything you could, supplements you can imagine. I have a whole huge protocol of that. I see a therapist every week. I have a money coach. I have a business coach. It's like a team effort to keep this show rolling.
100%. Well, I feel like probably in your work, you're just energetically just drained constantly, and that has to automatically impact your body, not just your spirit.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I feel like when I started doing this work, because I wasn't trained really, it wasn't until a little bit later on that I started to learn about spiritual traditions and energetic work where you're taught how to ground yourself and how to protect yourself energetically. Initially, it was totally exhausting for me. Like, I really was drained. Whereas now, because I know the techniques that I have to implement every day in order to do this work, daily or weekly, it's actually not so draining. It has the potential to be draining. Like last week, for example, if I found I was traveling a lot, and I found myself, slacking on my normal kind of energetic hygiene, for example. So I wasn't grounding myself as much as normal because I sort of was out of home. So I'd sort of forgotten about that ritual. And then I found, I did a day of work and I was totally exhausted, like fully exhausted, and also felt very emotional about the clients that I'd seen that day. Was sort of feeling like I was crying about one of their situations. Really crazy. For me, that's quite unusual, because I deal with people most of the time. When people come to me, it's not because things are going well, put it that way. It's generally the case that there's some sort of serious shit going down, and so I have to say I'm pretty good at maintaining very good boundaries, and I'm able to be very compassionate and fully see and feel and hear what's going on for them, but not take it on. But occasionally it something slips through, and then I'm like in pieces for a couple of days, and I've got to sort myself out again. But yes, I think basically I have to maintain a strong collection of boundaries in all ways. That's the key to my being able to work as much as I do, really, is strong boundaries, which interestingly people respond very differently to. Either they think that it's wonderful and inspiring and great to see a woman who's like clear about what they'll do and what they won't, or they respond very differently to that, which is always entertaining to me, because I'm just like, oh, I've identified someone I won't work for. Cool, let's move on.
And there's so much power there.
Yes, I mean, this is the thing. I had a funny interaction this week, which is like quite common for me, when I'll get an email from someone maybe I've read for them once, and they'll recommend someone, which I love. I must say this, like my favorite type of work is word of mouth, and I'm really fortunate that like 90% of my work comes through word of mouth, because I know that if I've read for someone and they've had a good experience enough to recommend their friend, then it's likely that I'll be able to help their friend in a similar way, and there's always just like a good energy to start off with in that situation. Anyway, I got an email from someone who had been recommended by a friend, and she was asking for some special sort of setup. Often people ask for discounts, or this particular person wanted to like have a reading but couldn't spend 45 minutes on the phone, because that's how long my readings are, 45 minutes, and so wanted to pay for one 45-minute reading but have it split over 2 days. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, no, like, I mean, just perfectly politely, like, that's not, I don't offer that, I'm sorry, no. But she just sort of wouldn't believe that I would say no, and threatened me of like, not only would she not come back to me, but she would not send any of her friends to me. And I'm like, God, honey, do you realize that I'm fully booked for the next 3 weeks, possibly next month? I'm cool with you not recommending me.
Right, like dodge that bullet.
Like, precisely because I rely upon recommendations on word of mouth. Don't get me wrong, like it's absolutely my bread and butter, and I require and appreciate and love and need those recommendations, but not from people that will, like that, basically, not from people that as soon as you establish a boundary, they want to fuck with you and they want to push you. It's like, you know what, I can miss me with that, fully miss me with that.
Right. So for people who are listening to this and they're going through a similar space in like their business, their personal life, like for me, like in my bachelorette business, sometimes I take on clients and I'm like, oh, I know they're going to be not worth it to to kind of put it very bluntly. And, you know, at least initially I'm like, God, there's like fear that if I don't accept them, you know, the business won't make money, et cetera, et cetera. So for those who are kind of in that same space where they have to say yes or no, do you have any words of wisdom for like having them say no?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends, doesn't it? I mean, I feel like, you know, this is probably my 20th year in my business. So it's probably only the last 5 years that I've been in the position to be able to say, no, thanks, you know, like confidently, and it not impact my business detrimentally. So I think the first thing is to work out, like, where are you actually in your business? Like, are you in a position where you do actually realistically, to pay the bills, need to still say yes to asshole clients? And like, for every single person that's ever run a business, like, believe me, obviously we've all got to go through that phase. And sometimes that phase lasts a couple of months, sometimes it's a couple of years. For me, it was definitely years, like years and years. But I also think that, you know, the mind plays tricks on us and is constantly undermining us. And I think that it's very often the case that I see women particularly being in actually really quite strong positions. They don't really need to be, you know, eating shit. And they still somehow think or have been told that, you know, there's this poverty consciousness and this scarcity mentality, which means that they have to accept everything and say yes to everything still. And so I suppose the first thing I would say is take a really like rational, unemotional look at where you actually are financially and in terms of repeat business. Like, if you were to just start saying no to clients that you really don't enjoy working with, like, would that have a detrimental impact? And if it wouldn't, or you're not sure, just say no, try it out. Nothing's permanent. Try it for a month, you know, like, have a go. But the other thing I would say is, you know, we are enculturated and socialized as women to say yes to everything and everyone. And so my response to that is, my default is no. My default is no with everything. And then if I want to change my mind, then somebody has to convince me that it's the right decision to change my mind on that. Because I think I'm very suspicious of, you know, our in sort of internal socialized impulse to say yes to everything, you know. And also the other thing is, you've got to weigh up what it's worth. Like, if there's a certain client, I mean, I remember this even when I was like scraping around for my rent. There was a certain client, he was a man, and he was creepy as hell, and he would come for healings, because I also trained and worked as a crystal healer at the same time as a tarot reader. He would come for crystal healings every day, which is like totally not necessary at all. And I would say to him, you don't need to come back for like 3 weeks. He would come for crystal healings every day just because, and I knew this, so he could lie on the couch and have my hands like placed on his shoulders and be like close to me. And it creeped me out so much that in the end I was like, God, this is, I think it was like £25, and that was a lot of money to me then. I just decided it's actually really not worth that £25 for me to be feeling this uncomfortable or this angry or this whatever it is that one feels when you have a client that you don't want to work for. And so even then I was like, no, you know what, I've weighed it up in my mind and it's actually absolutely not worth it. So no, peace out, you're gone. So that's what I would say. Assess actually the reality of your situation and then try saying no. And remember that nothing's permanent. So you can make a decision and go back on that decision in a month's time. Worst case scenario is you've like missed out on one asshole client. I mean, believe me, there'll be many more.
Well, thank you for that very powerful bit of advice, and I'm certainly going to take it and apply it even more so than what I already do. And I want to ask just kind of a few more like rapid fire questions. And one of them is, if there are people out there, and I'm sure there are more than we know, who are kind of at the beginning stages of kind of feeling like there's a portal or, they're seeing and hearing, what would you recommend that they do?
So the first thing I would say is create and form a meditation practice. Like, this is the most boring thing on earth to do, actually, and it's extremely difficult to start with, but it's so essential to your physical health, your emotional health, and your ability to manage this energy. Because if you are already feeling that you're in touch with other beings or other things or other energies or however it manifests for you, then the biggest job you're going to have in your life is learning how to manage those energies. And the only way that you can manage them is by using your mind. So one needs to develop that muscle. So start meditating. And then secondly, like start reading, but be selective about, who you pay attention to, because there's a whole lot of crazy people out there, who will, will tell you.
I attract the crazy. Amazing. Okay. And for those who are looking to find you, and of course I'll link in the show notes, where can they see more about you and your work and potentially request to work with you?
So the best platform, I think the platform I use the most is Instagram. I'm on Instagram every day. It's kind of an addiction. So Instagram, and I have a website, and I have a couple of books. The first book that I wrote is being republished, actually. So that will be out. Second edition is coming out in November. Actually, it's supposed to be October 31st, Halloween, although that makes me cringe a little bit because it's such a cliché. But yes, Instagram has everything, every link.
Okay, great. And what's your Instagram handle?
It's Kate Tomas, PhD.
And Tomas is Tomas, correct?
Yes, that's right. It's totally misspelled by.
I want to make sure. Yeah, I want to make sure that people, if they don't look at the show notes, they'll be able to find you. And then as far as your book that's being republished, congrats. And what's the title?
So it's called Chakra Crystals, and it is a book about meditating with crystals, but also about how to work with crystals generally. So how to choose them, program them, dedicate them, cleanse them, and mainly it sort of helps you to develop a meditation practice. So really, if you are starting out on any kind of spiritual journey, everyone says you need to meditate, but not very many people sort of tell you really how.
Right. There's so many different styles and what is meditation versus mindfulness, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I honestly couldn't even tell you the answer to that. And this is my profession, like what the hell is the difference between this? I don't really know. I think mindfulness is just being present. I think mindfulness is a kind of non-spiritual term that's sort of safe for most people to describe meditation, because meditation is simply the focus on one thing to the exclusion of all else. Like that's all it is. And mindfulness sort of encourages you to focus on the breath. Which is a very effective meditation technique. So go for it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. And then just one last question before we come to a close. And I ask everybody this: what are you, as I like to say, tooting your horn about? What are you celebrating right now?
That's a really good question. The thing that I'm celebrating at the moment is my partner Ames and I have just agreed to take on. We found a house that we want to live in, and we're just about to sign the contract on that. So we're actually emigrating. We're moving from New York, which is where we are now, back to England. And we just found like a big 3-bedroom house with a huge garden, and the animals will be able to go outside. It's the back garden backs onto a huge ancient forest. It's like some crazy magical woodland place. So that's the most exciting stuff that's going on for us right now, which is pretty exciting.
That is very exciting and very adult. Amazing. Well, it has been awesome to talk with you, Kate, and thank you for sharing your journey and all of your words of wisdom. I wish you a beautiful evening and a happy journey back to England.
Thank you so much. It was great fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Her Drive with Cindy Kramblatt. If you want to know more about today's guest or know a fascinating woman you'd love for me to interview, please see the show notes, visit Instagram or her-drive.com. And please, 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 if you love the show, leave a review on iTunes. Thanks for riding along, and subscribe to join our next woman and her drive to success.